Hello, I'm Alex and I want to welcome you to my Finding Lost Civilization series. Today we're going to go to a place called Donner Summit, which is located in the California Sierras. And we're going to visit snow sheds. Now you might ask yourself, snow sheds? What are snow sheds and what do they have to do with finding lost civilizations? Well, as a point of reference, let me explain that in the 1860s there was an effort to unite the east and west coast of America through a railway line. And so a railway called the Union Pacific started building a rail line out to the west from the east coast. And at the same time, another company called the Central Pacific Railroad was building a railroad from San Francisco out east. And in 1869 they eventually met in Utah. But the Central Pacific Railroad had a daunting task as it crossed the California Sierras. The problem was that a place like Donner Summit, snowdrifts sometimes were 60 feet high. Well, how could they prevent these snowpacks from stopping the trains? They decided to build snow sheds. These were sheds placed over the railway line where the train ran through, and they were constructed of wood. Now again, you might ask yourself, well, what's so interesting about that? Well, listen, when America was settled, in the 16th century, within 300 years, the original old-growth forests of America were almost exclusively, over 90% were cut down. They were cut down, So, when these railway sheds were being built, original growth lumber was being used. Later on, as time went along, this wooden snow sheds were replaced by concrete snow sheds. Also, some of them caught fire because originally the trains that ran through these snow sheds were coal burnings, and they threw out sparks that burned some of the sheds down. Well, whenever a shed was torn down or replaced, oftentimes they would take this lumber and they would throw it, they would cast it down the embankment from where the railway line was. So I found a location where some of this wood exists. And I found it interesting because the wood that we're going to be looking at could be 1,000 years old. And even more interesting, when this railway line was being constructed, when these snow sheds were being built, many of the nails that were used to put these snow sheds together were handcrafted. They were individually made by blacksmiths. So this is another thing we're going to see. We're going to see original growth American trees with handcrafted nails that were cast aside when these wooden snow sheds were no longer used. So, it's a little bit of history that I find interesting. Behind me you can see the forest. And when people come up here and they look at the forest, they go, oh, that's beautiful. And they think it's been here since time immemorial. The fact is that these are all young trees. Young trees. Original old-growth trees were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 feet wide and hundreds of feet high. These are babies. These are youngsters. They're not even teenagers. My goodness. No, many people don't realize that. There are a few strands of original growth trees left in America. And they're probably out in Alaska and along the west coast of California in the redwood forests. So, anyways, it just goes to show you that in terms of finding lost civilizations, we don't only, or we shouldn't only consider civilizations that are 1,000 years old. There's some of our history that's 100 or 200 or 300 years old that's unknown and lost. And so, in this quest to go up to Donner Summit to find this original growth lumber is a journey to finding lost civilizations. So come on, come with me, and let's go have some fun. Directly in front of me, I'm going to zoom in on what these elements are over here. This is a railway line over here that was built in the 1860s, and that is now what's called a shed, a snow shed. When they built this railway here in the 1860s, that was made from redwood. And right over here, after they built the concrete one, they took that redwood and they threw it down this hill over here. And we're going to take a hike up to that spot to take a look at the remnants of this old snow shed. Well, we've arrived to the slope. Okay, this slope over here, which is below the railway tracks. Right up there is the new snow shed made out of concrete. Right over here in front of us, you can see all this lumber over here. This is original growth lumber that existed before the arrival of the first settlers here in America. But look at this over here. Look at this big iron bar. And if you can imagine, in 1860 they were cutting down, they were clear cutting the forests around here and taking old growth, original growth lumber up here to build the railroad, to build the snow sheds, to build... I have an old beam over here and I want to show you its size. Look at the length and the width of that old beam. I'll tell you what, you know, it's hard to find beams this long, this wide, and this big because they haven't grown up yet. Original old growth wood was wide, large, and tall, and they were one piece, or out of one tree you could make several pieces. But look at this over here. Look at that. That's a handmade spike used in original construction. Look at this, it's coming out in the original construction of this bridge in 1860. This wood is very, very soft. Look at that, time and elements, and you can tell it's redwood. Look at the color red here. But look at this. Look at this spike. This was used to construct the snow sheds in the 1860s. Well, there's that large timber that we just looked up at. And if you look over here, you can see the remnants of the old snow sheds. And there's the new one. As I was climbing up the hill, I looked down, and it looked to me like just a piece of wood. But here you have a spike, hand-carved, handcrafted, okay, by a blacksmith for the railroad, okay, probably made in the 1860s. You can see it's what they call a square here, and it's tapered down. This is very old. This was probably constructed in the 1860s. And look at this over here. Here's another spike. Okay, very old elements right over here. This is very old over here. I guess one could consider it an antique. Here's another nail. They use several variations of nails. This one, for sure, is handcrafted. The square ones were handcrafted. Now, during that period, they did have what I would call mass-produced or machined nails, okay? But they weren't as perfectly round on the heads as today's are, and you can see it's a little irregular. Quite a big nail. This one also probably dates from the 1860s. So this is a very interesting piece of recent American history. So we're going to continue our search to find elements, metal elements that were used. Oh, look at this. Here's another one. Look. Okay, here's another handcrafted nail. And I'll tell you what, they were sharp. This here is as sharp as a needle. Right here, there's the tip. So there's another handcrafted nail over here. And look at this over here. I noticed this here. this big piece of redwood over here, rotting away. I mean, it's very soft. Look at this, it's very soft. And look, here's another metal element that was used in the construction of these snow shed. There's another piece right there. So let's continue our search. Well, we're exploring this debris field, and what I found was this large metal piece, and I took a look at it, and lo and behold, what it is, it's one of the original rails. Look at this over here. It's upside down. It's upside down. But let's go ahead and take a look. There you have it. All right. This is the original rail that was used when they built the railway here in the early 1860s. And you can tell, look at this over here, the rough edges, you know, it wasn't a fine steel work, but this is it right here. What they did is they replaced a lot of the original line. They put a different gauge on there that could take heavier trains and bigger trains. But this is part of it right over here. This is actually could be a museum piece. Cut over here and cut over here and put on display. Yes, okay. Very, very interesting. What we're going to do is climb up to that humongous big piece over there, right up there. It's a wide piece, an old growth piece. Let's go examine it. Well, here we have a fairly large piece. Look at this. It's a good 3 feet wide, and probably even maybe up to 4 feet. But you can see up here where it's split off. Maybe that's another top element. You know, this is original growth wood. It's very difficult today to find a tree that has a 4-foot beam. You can't find them. It's almost impossible because our trees in America are not old enough. As I mentioned, by the turn or the end of the 18th century, by the end of the 18th century, over 90% of the virgin wood, the original wood of America, had been cut down. Well, here's another little debris field I found, and there you have these nails laying here. These are all elements from the 1860s. Yes, these are all elements. Looks like they had some kind of construction method where they drove the nail in, okay, right here, you see? This all appears to be uniform. In other words, it doesn't seem to have somewhat broken down in a deconstruction process. Look at this. So all the nails over here have this 90-degree bent to them. So I'm not sure, but possibly it had something to do with the construction element or construction mechanics that they were using at the time. Very interesting. Well, here's another piece right here. Look at this. Right here. Let's see. Oh my goodness, look at this. This is beautiful. Look at the size of this piece. It's really great. I laid my walking stick down here, but look at this. I found this here also. Okay, it's broken, but there it is. It's actually a piece that long. Well, look at this. Here's another little ancient spike, you know, from the original construction of the railroad. Well, let's put it together with all the things we've found and review everything that we've got. Well, here are the interesting little metal objects that we found exploring, I guess, part of America's new history. These are all elements used in building the railway from San Francisco out towards east as they were building a railway from east to west, meeting in Utah. Look at this one, handcrafted. Old nails, square type, very fine piece of work. Spikes, okay, look at these spikes over here. So, an interesting piece, as I said, of American history. I hope you've enjoyed this little trek as much as I have.